Bonjour, folks. I'm Sass, and I'm in progress. Welcome to episode 2 of Creator Conversations. If you came over from episode 1, that was titled Rebranding, Refining, and I gave a little backstory about who I am, a sound designer and editor, and I also do production sound on set, recording for film and podcasts. And I came into the 2025 with an intentional rebrand of my company, Storied Soundscapes, because I expanded into sonic wellness, providing workshops. And today I want to talk about how starting a Substack this year helped me to make that transition. I first became aware of Substack earlier this year because a lot of the creators that I follow started listing their Substacks in the screenshots for their Instagram or their links in their bios. So I went over and checked out the site because I was familiar with the other site, Medium, where people publish their writing. And for some reason, I never really connected with Medium. I think the interface of it didn't really make sense, and it didn't have the social media element to it that, to me, Substack has. So when I went over to Substack, it seemed more a user-friendly interface like Instagram, because you have the feed where as soon as you log in, you can see who is in your algorithm, whose writing matches content that you might be interested in, and you also have the people that you follow. So I set up a Substack with the intention of beginning a writing practice this year. And I want to talk about the reasons that I set up a Substack and some of the benefits that I've found. So, as I mentioned in episode 1, I'm going through a refinement of the rebranding process that I began at the beginning of this year. And one of the things that I intend to do heading into 2026 is that I have the job titles that I've given myself of sound designer, editor, storyteller, content creator. I had various iterations of those four titles throughout 2024 into 2025. And as I'm going into 2026 and making a refinement of my brand and my own identity as a professional, I wanted to have one cohesive job title that encompasses everything that I do. So that includes production and post production sound for film and podcast, and getting into the sonic wellness space, creating custom soundscapes, and providing workshops and writing about sound healing, wellness, and combining that with media analysis that I do from sound design analysis of films, music, and media in general. My main objective in starting a Substack is that one of the goals I have for 2026 is to establish myself as a thought leader in the sonic wellness space. So that means when people are thinking about sound healing, sound in general, whether it be sound design for film, media, and combining sound into wellness practices for healing, for meditation, yoga, any of those kind of practices, I want to establish myself as a thought leader in that space. And so I see Substack as a digital portfolio to begin that process. One of the main things I wanted to do with Substack was get back into academic style writing, because in school, that was one of my favorite things to do. To be able to take something like a book or a film and analyze it, digest the information, resynthesize it, and I think that's an important aspect of writing, is to be able to explain it in a simple manner to somebody who's not familiar with the subject that you're talking about. I think that is the best way to prove your proficiency with a subject, is to be able to take a complex subject and distill it into bite-sized, digestible content for people who may not be familiar with the subject that you're talking about. So that is step one of the Substack, was to establish a writing practice and to be able to start synthesizing information in my field to bite-sized content that somebody who's not familiar with sound, with wellness, with sonic wellness as a subject, can be able to start understanding it. Going along with the portfolio theme, I want to have a digital portfolio so that when people search my name and they see that I do sound overall, they will be able to have Substack right away to be able to read about the work that I'm doing and get an idea of who I am. So I see it as a shortcut and a digital portfolio slash resume to be able to get myself out there as a leader in my field for sound and sonic wellness. One of the goals I have for my Substack in 2026 is to expand beyond my comfort zone. So a lot of my pieces this year, they did focus on sound healing, but I also did a lot of media analysis of films and movies. And I'll share some of my favorite pieces. The first piece that I really loved this year was called Microphones and Recording Devices as Main Characters. And it was an analysis of the two films The Conversation, directed by Francis Ford Coppola and starring Jane Hackman, and Blowout, starring John Travolta and directed by Brian De Palma. And I analyzed the two films and talked about how microphones and recording devices, they weren't only used as tools of surveillance, but they actually took up a lot of space within the frame of any given visual that you saw, and they were such a crucial part of driving the plot line of both movies. And so I related that back to wellness to show that a lot of times you have to go back to analog means of, let's say, for me, I gave the example of my bullet journal. So I started using a physical bullet journal instead of a digital bullet journal or a digital tracking platform. And I found that having a analog system like that enabled me to be so much more accountable to myself. So I used the two films instead of talking about the overall themes of surveillance, which a lot of film analysis tends to use those films to talk about. I related it back to wellness in terms of talking about how a return to analog can help us be more mindful. Another favorite piece that I wrote was The Frequency of Fear. And I talked about the sound design of the film The Day the Earth Stood Still. And the score is composed by one of my favorites, Bernard Herrmann. And I talked about the instrument, the theremin, which I had never heard of before. But the theremin is an electronic instrument that was used to create the eerie sound that I'll put a clip of how it sounds. That eerie sound that you hear throughout the movie has now become a kind of sonic signature for creepiness in the sci-fi genre, horror genre. And Bernard Herrmann was one of the composers who was instrumental, pun intended, in creating that kind of sound design motif. One of the most recent pieces that I wrote was called When Jazz Met Noir, and the theme for my membership site, Home Frequency, was called Noirvember, where I used the sound design and voiceover techniques from classic noir films to create the two ritual soundscapes for the month. And in the Substack article, I detailed how a bit of the history of jazz music, which I didn't know before researching for the article, but jazz music first began in New Orleans in the late 19th century, early 20th century in Black neighborhoods in New Orleans. And because jazz music had that early association with African Americans, when it came time to using music to distinguish otherness and the more shadowy aspects of society, that's where jazz music came in for the film noir genre, because there was already that association with mainstream white audiences of jazz with blackness. And I loved doing the research and being able to find out that history behind jazz and understand how it was used to be an automatic signal for otherness. So those were some of the favorite Substack articles that I wrote this year. And one of my goals for 2026 is to expand beyond film and talk about world music in general and challenge myself to learn more and write more beyond what Western influences that I am familiar with. So I'm familiar with composers like Bernard Herrmann, John Williams, James Horner. A lot of those are people that we are all familiar with, and I would like to highlight more people and also move beyond film. I think film is very much my comfort zone, and I would like to expand into music, avant-garde, experimental, and bring to my audience more interesting conversation about sound, about wellness, about sound healing as well. I would like to start researching the history of how sound has been used for things like meditation, learn more about the science behind it as well, about how sound frequencies can be used to help with healing. And that is what I'm going to expand into in 2026 with my Substack. The other thing I intend to do is just have fun. Getting back into the practice of writing has been so fulfilling because, especially in this digital age where it's so easy to consume a lot of other people's content, Substack has allowed me to be very intentional in my consumption. Because I saw another creator talk about how when you read a book or when you listen to a podcast, you just do those things and then when it's done, you put the book away, you put the podcast away, but you don't really take the time to distill the information. And writing the Substack has enabled me to take the time to annotate and distill the information that I'm consuming and be very intentional with the information that I'm consuming. And that's why I think whether you are writing for pleasure or writing for professional purposes, Substack is a great way to consume mindfully. So that is the nutshell version of why I started a Substack this year and why I think anyone should start a Substack. If you're a professional and you want to have some kind of digital portfolio, whether you identify as a writer or not, I think it's a great tool for any professional who wants to establish themselves as a thought leader in their field. I've seen a lot of nurses, psychologists, and doctors on there, as well as historians. There's a lot of people on there who identify as public historians. I think Substack is great, no matter what field you're in, to be able to share your knowledge. If you're someone who wants to begin consuming mindfully, get your brain working, go on rabbit holes for subjects you're interested in, and have a way to distill the information you're consuming, Substack is a great place to do that. And I intend to do so much more writing, and I'm going to come back in 2026 and share some of my findings in more videos. But I wanted to use this episode to give an overview of why I started Substack and what I think the benefits are. So I hope if you are a creator yourself or any kind of professional, you look into Substack, at least join and see what kind of writing is out there, because it's not just essay kind of writing. I've seen people writing poetry. I've seen people writing fiction. I think it's such a great alternative to the doom scrolling of Instagram or TikTok. So I encourage you, if you're someone who likes to mindfully consume social media, Substack is a great option. In the next episode, I'm going to talk a little bit more about home frequency and how I spent the year experimenting with my content and with my sound in general and what I learned from that. But that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Let me know if you have a Substack yourself and what you talk about in the comments, and I would love to check it out. I will see you back here for more creator conversations.